Bon dia a tothom. Hello everyone. Avui tenim amb nosaltres Vicent Briva Iglesias, que farà l'últim seminari de l'any de 2025 de Regulator i ens parlarà un tema molt interessant i molt important d'agents d'IA, AI agents, que crec que podem dir que és la paraula de l'any de 2025, perquè tota la gent parla sobre aquesta paraula, que és podem dir que és un neologisme ara, i nosaltres ens agrada paraules noves en Regulator i ens fa gran plaer i honor tenir Vicent Briva per parlar sobre IA, agents d'IA i també su relació amb terminologia. Moltes gràcies, Vicent, per estar amb nosaltres i et deixo fer tu presentació. Moltes gràcies.
Perfecte. En primer lloc, moltes gràcies a Gohan i a l'equip de l'IULAB per la invitació. És un plaer estar així. Tota oportunitat d'escapar-se del temps de Dublín pensa que és bona. Com a persona de València, amb bon temps, Dublín, mal temps, pluja, sempre és una oportunitat increïble de vindre a veure el sol. Per tant, primera vegada, però espero que no sigui l'última, però sí. I'm going to start or do like a very brief presentation in Spanish, in Catalan, but then I'll move and the main talk will be in English, okay? So just that we are all on the same page. Breu presentació. Aquí aneu a estar escoltant ara mateix. Soc assistant professor en Translation Technology o en Tecnologies de Traducció a Dublin City University. Soc també el director dels dos programes de postgrau. Tenim un MA in Translation Studies i un MSc in Translation Technology, on fem Python i un perfil més tecnològic per a traductors. També soc adjunct professor en McGill University en Canadà. Soc col·laborador també en l'Oberta de Catalunya, en la UOC, i a banda he col·laborat també amb el Barcelona Supercomputing Center en intel·ligència artificial per a sanitat i últim, gestione una xicoteta empresa de tecnologia de la llengua que té la seva seu en Irlanda, que es diu Awards Language Engineering, okay? So I'll start in English from here on, okay? So first of all, before moving into AI agents, which is what Gohan has just said, that it's like the crucial, key, hot topic right now, I think that the most important thing is that to make sure that we are all on the same page regarding machine translation or AI terminology. And for those of you you may be in linguistics, terminology, translation studies, translation technology, but we have been seeing an evolution of language technologies. We started with rule-based machine translation. We continued with statistical machine translation, neural machine translation, and more recently, yesterday, it was 3 years ago, ChatGPT was released or launched to the world, which has changed dramatically how we interact with language technologies. And at the end, I want you to know that ChatGPT is only one product from a company that's called OpenAI, but the technology behind it's called large language models or LLMs. That's what we are going to be discussing mainly today. And one of the most important things is that right now we are all talking about AI. We have AI hasta en la sopa. And it's true that if we look at the different technologies or the underlying technology behind most of these language technologies, basically everything is using machine learning or deep learning with some kind of like variations, but we could already say that statistical machine translation in the 1980s was already AI. So what has changed right now is that I think that with large language models, the new thing that they understand natural language, and then they have reached a higher population of like normal people, probably not in academic or industry circles, that start working or interacting with these technologies. And curiously, right now, for example, I go in the metro or I go in the bus, and I see a lot of people just using like ChatGPT in their phones. I know that I shouldn't be looking at their phones, but well, it's interesting, okay, to know that it has reached like a huge group of people. And once we are more or less on the same kind of page, my question here is what comes next? Any ideas? And you can look at the topic or the title of the talk. Okay, AI agents, wonderful, positive point there. So yeah, I think that we can be saying that AI agents are probably like the next step in this evolution, even if AI agents work with underlying LLMs. So at the end, it's LLMs are still the technology there, but I'm going to explain a bit more everything on AI agents, okay? So what are AI agents? I think is the most logical question that comes here. Below you have a QR code that links to a published paper in MT Summit. It's a paper on AI agent for multilingual digital communication, but I'm going to explain that now, okay? So the definition could be autonomous or semi-autonomous software program defined to first reason about tasks and then execute actions to achieve predefined goals, okay? I have highlighted different areas of this sentence or this definition here on purpose. And first of all, autonomous or semi-autonomous, I want you to consider that in some cases it may just be a computer program that just conducts one task and that's it. Or it can be one kind of computer program that conducts one task, asks one human in order to verify, validate something, and then continues conducting the task. And then the most important thing here is reasoning. And I'm going to use reasoning with quotation marks because it's a complex kind of concept, but these agents can, or these systems can reason about some kind of tasks. And then most importantly, goals, okay? Execute some kind of actions until they get to some kind of goals. Once we have this clear, we go one step further. It's what can agents do? Two main things, I think, arise here. First of all is tool access. So they can have access to a specific set of tools. One example, I think the most useful here is glossaries, terminology databases, so IATE, TEMCAT, so on and so forth. And then we have also like model context protocols or some other technologies that I'm not going to delve into like in details, but they have access to a wide range of tools, and then you can select which tools are the ones that interest you for like your specific use case, okay? And then objectives. Objectives and this iteration until they achieve some kind of objective is sometimes what could also be like a prompt or like some kind of instructions that you set for like a specific tool, okay? So I want you to do a translation, or I want you to extract terminology on X, Y, Z, or I want you to do insert whatever you do, okay? And finally, I think that the last important thing here is that there are two main modalities of agents. We can have only one agent. So we talk about single agent systems, or we can have different agents. We can talk about multi-agent systems. I have everything clear, more or less. I suppose that's going to be a yes. And as my grandmother says, and she's a very clever woman, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So let's put this into a more practical visual explanation, okay? We have here two examples of a single agent system and a multi-agent system. It comes also from the paper, but in the single agent system, it could just be translate in an LLM, for example, translate this into something or extract terminology from this kind of document, so on and so forth. And then the agent does one task. It has the objective, and then it can have access to tools. So, for example, it can say, try to extract terminology, and by looking at the TEMCAT or any other database or any other glossary specific from a specific client, so on and so forth. And then we get one output if this objective is met, okay? We can have a multi-agent system in which there's this first agent that provides or produces a translation. Then there's a check whether this objective or goal has been solved or met. And if this hasn't been met, there's a second agent that reviews or conducts some additional task in order for the objective to be met, okay? Until we achieve or get our expected output. Important things here is that personalization and customization are key. And this needs to be personalized, or this system needs to be personalized at the product or use case scenario. Let's say, for example, legal translation. Let's say, for example, healthcare. Let's say, for example, public services in the government, or so on and so forth, okay? So the different goals or the different organization of the systems or of the agents depend on the specific use case. And this is done via prompt engineering, context engineering. I'm more reluctant to use prompt engineering. I like context engineering more because there's like one of the most important is knowing what's the most crucial information that you need to give to a system or an LLM in this case in order to achieve something. And then there's some kind of technical knowledge required in order to understand different file formats. So are we talking like playing around with codes? Are we playing around with like any other kind of like file format? This is interesting or relevant to know, okay? So personalizing these systems for each of our use cases is very relevant here. And then important thing, what I want to say is that there are limitless workflows, okay? I've displayed 2 examples, but think of any other different example for your specific use case, and I will show later like some other graphs or visualizations of potential use cases, okay? And then most importantly, traditionally, we've been only looking, at least from translation or machine translation studies, that's where I come from, at machine translation, but there are many other language technologies that we can do right now. So for example, terminology extraction, plain language editing, so on and so forth, okay? There are many other language operations that these systems could help with. Then we have like the technical tools, retrieval augmented generation. So this is some kind of tools and a lay summary. Instead of just retraining a system or a machine translation system or an LLM, what we have is a database with some data. So the system checks that database and gives some kind of priority to that database. Okay, imagine that instead of retraining a system with terminology from the Institute d'Estudis Catalans, we have that database, so the system looks at there and prioritizes all this terminology over any other terminology that the system has learned in the training process, okay? And finally, we have another interesting element, that's temperature. For those of you working or playing around with language models, basically, we can say that temperature is like the creativity of LLMs. So the higher the temperature, the more creative they are, or the more open that they are to give like different kind of outputs, the less or the lower temperature, the more deterministic they are, okay? Normally, this changes from LLM provider to LLM provider, but I played around, for example, with OpenAI systems or language models, and if you put a temperature score of 2, it just mixes Chinese, Spanish, Catalan, so on and so forth. So too much creative, I would say, okay? So playing with this temperature with this setting is important when designing and deploying agents. So once this is clear, and hopefully it is, I did a pilot study on a specific AI agent system for translation. In this case, was for legal translation, and it's once again from the same paper. Okay, it was published in this summer. And first of all, we have one source text. Then we have a first agent that produces translation, so it's a translator agent. Then we have 2 subsequent agents. One is a fluency reviewer, and another one is an adequacy reviewer. So each of them had specific instructions on look at fluency and provide suggestions on how to improve fluency. And the other one has the same kind of instructions, but to look at adequacy, okay? So provide improvements on adequacy. Finally, these 2 reviewer agents provided some kind of suggestions. And finally, there was an editor agent that put all these suggestions in common and produced or shared a final translation with all these suggestions in an automatic way, okay? So kind of an automatic post-editing kind of workflow. These were the instructions or like the prompts that were given to each of these agents or these systems, and very basic ones, okay? Important to know, I did not give or did not granted tool access to any of these systems, or so it's just one very easy prompt. So the translator agent, easy one. You are a senior legal translator specializing in IP documents, intellectual property. Translate this document from English into Spanish, and with perfect accuracy, legal terminology consistency, and publication ready quality, return only the translation, okay? This was the instruction rule for the translator agent. Then both for the fluency and the adequacy reviewer agents where you're a fluency reviewer specializing in reviewing from this language to that other language, strict instructions. Review the current translation for fluency issues, grammar, spelling, so on and so forth, and then output only a list of suggestions as plain language bullet points. It was the same for adequacy. Here, what I want you to think about is imagine that you have one client or that you work for one organization and that you already have one glossary or one style guide on tone of voice, so on and so forth. So you could provide or give agents all this knowledge in different ways, okay? So that they make sure that there's terminology coherence or that there's some kind of terminology enforcement in case that the translator agent is not using the appropriate terminology, which happens, okay? And at the end, we have the editor agent that puts all these suggestions together and produces a final translation. So what did we compare, or what did I compare? So 6 different systems in order to check whether everything that I've been saying is worth it or everything that I've been saying is not worth it. So first we had a multi-agent system with large language models, in this case with big large language models, and I'm calling them multi-agent big and multi-agent big 1.3 and 1.3 0.5. The first one was using DeepSeek R1, so it's a very big large language model, Chinese open source, 671 billion of parameters, and all the different agents, the 4 agents had a temperature of 1.3. Why a temperature of 1.3? It's what DeepSeek recommended in their documentation, okay? Then what I wanted to check is I'm gonna use the same large language model, but I'm gonna play around with temperature. So in order to see what's the impact of this creativity factor or score on large language models. So I had the translator agent and the editor agent with a temperature of 1.3 because translating or editing it requires probably a bit more of creativity. But then I asked the both the reviewers, the accuracy and the fluency ones, to have only like a 0.5 temperature. So I wanted them to be more deterministic because I saw in earlier tests that the higher the temperature, the more changes they proposed, even if they were probably preferential, okay? Even if they were not needed. So I just wanted, just change them if they are needed. If they are not needed, do not change them. Then we have Google Translator and DeepL. I think we all know them, right? State-of-the-art neural machine translation systems. I made sure that they were using the NMT system. For example, DeepL is right now introducing large language models, so they had the option of saying classical language model or modern language model. It was the classical language model, NMT. And then a different kind of multi-agent system, but in small language models, okay, to see the impact in this age of sustainability and to see whether it's brute force or not brute force or how to use the most efficient use of resources. I wanted to check also the impact of the size of the large language model used. So I used GPT-4o Mini. It was supposed to be a smaller language model. It's proprietary, so I do not know like the parameters that they have, but reportedly they are smaller. And then once again, the same strategy with temperature, okay? I'm gonna ask you, and hopefully you've been following. So what do you guys think that have been like the results? Any idea? Think about, we have multi-agent system with very big large language models, a state-of-the-art neural machine translation, the traditional machine translation, and a multi-agent system with a small large language models. Okay? Any idea? Gohan, I'm not allowed you. You're not allowed to do that.
What languages were you pronounced?
English into Spanish. So who do you think wins? And why?
I can guess.
Okay, go for it.
I can guess that with the ones you have asked the fluency and adequacy.
The fluency and adequacy reduced or high?
Let me know, show me again. No, that would be agent with temperature.
With low temperature.
There are agents for fluency and adequacy.
Okay, interesting guess. Why do you think that?
Well, until these, I think that natural neural machine translation would have been the winner, because they have included some revisions at the end. It's the beam search algorithm that improves the translation, because it's not just taking the most probable, but it waits until the end, and then it is the most complete setting. That is probably. But probably it's true that with your agents, probably this is solved.
So very interesting guess, and I like that there's a rationale behind it. The results, you can see them here. Multi-agent big systems were ahead. We analyzed, I think, I forgot the number, but I think it was 6,000 words. A professional translator, English to Spanish, who assessed all the translations, both at adequacy and fluency level from 1 to 4. Okay, so academia, we would love to have more money, but we have limited resources. So that was already like a big human evaluation of this quality by a professional translator. So we are not talking about automatic metrics. And interestingly, multi-agent big 1.3 with all these systems with higher temperature were like the ones that got like the best results. Then multi-agent big with different temperatures had the second ones. And then we had like the two other neural machine translation systems in the middle, okay? We saw that multi-agent small were lagging behind. So that was kind of a hypothesis that the bigger the model, we spend more resources in terms of energy, all this kind of stuff, but results in translation at least also are better in that point of time, okay? So that was, if I'm not mistaken, early 2025. Things change very fast in this field. So things may change, but we can see that temperature is relevant and it's an important factor to play with. And language model size, it's also an important factor and it's interesting to play with as well, okay? But what I think is the most interesting or the most relevant part here is that we have a limitless way of configuring agents or organizing many different types of workflows. Okay, if we want to say that, you are interested, most of you are interested in terminology or in applied linguistics in many different like areas, I suppose. So imagine that you want to have, it's very difficult to have a neural machine translation system or a machine translation system that uses a specific terminology. Even if you do some kind of training, most of the times this data doesn't get like preference. So in this kind of workflows, it could be that, for example, we have a first machine translation system, and it can be a neural machine translation system, or it can be a large language model, and we can then have an agent that makes sure that terminology is enforced. So we look at the source text, this is a word that we have in our glossary, and then we make sure that the output text has this word in our glossary. Is this real? No, then I change it, okay? So these are like interesting ways of designing all this kind of stuff. One way, for example, there's an orchestrator agent, in this case, more like for translation industry. So imagine that a company that translates for all different languages. So one orchestrator agent that divides the work or different tasks between different agents. And then it's better that instead of just one agent doing like 3 different tasks, we have one specific agent for each task. And then there's a last agent that puts everything together and produces an output. Or the evaluator optimizer one, when we have an agent that produces a translation, then we have a second agent or reviewer that checks whether the translation is good or not and accepts or rejects it, and there's kind of a continuous iteration. This has problems as well, which I'm gonna say later or share later, but I just want to think that you can just like imagine that you can just move around all these kind of like boxes and try to think of, okay, so which is my use case, or where do I use technology for this, and what are my bottlenecks right now? So imagine that this doesn't work right now, or this workflow or this technology doesn't work for me. How can I break down this task or this big task in smaller chunks or in smaller tasks, and how can I make this work better at the end, okay? So interesting way or interesting moments ahead, I would say, okay? However, there's not, everything's not good. And I would be lying if I was saying, no, everything, this is the best thing ever, and this is going to change everything and all that kind of stuff. I really think that this is where we are going. This is the next step. And that's the reason why AI agents are like the most common or topic or hot topic right now. But there's a lot of problems as well, okay? LLMs are non-deterministic systems, so sometimes you give the same input and you receive different outputs. So how do we measure whether the output is appropriate or not? That's a problem. And then how do we measure that a reviewer agent says, oh no, this is appropriate, and I'm gonna stop the call, and I'm gonna stop the workflow, and I'm gonna give the output. How do we do that with a non-deterministic system? That's difficult, but we are starting to see also like some kind of ways of controlling behavior in this kind of stuff. That's my personal battle that I think it's lost within academia, but we need to move away from automatic metrics alone. In machine translation, most of the people only look at automatic metrics, law, meteor, so on and so forth. And I really think that we need to do human evaluation. But how do we do human evaluation for AI agents or complex workflows? Well, that's something new, something that we need to think about as well. If you're interested in that, I invite you to think about that. Then word rails, I think it's one of the most important things also with LLMs and non-deterministic systems. Once again, how do we ensure that the agent meets its objective? There are ways of finding all these kind of word rails. Then how we can ensure reliability and trustworthiness. Imagine that we are using this or applying this in a high-stakes scenario, healthcare or legal translation, so on and so forth. How do we measure that systems are reliable and safe? Then performance cost trade-off, an additional problem. Large language models work via token management, so you pay for them depending on tokens. And then finding optimal token management, it's very important. Why? Because imagine that you give the text to one agent, then this agent gets all the text plus provides a translation. But then to the second agent, you need to give the initial text, the output of the second agent, plus the input of, and then this gets stacking, so a lot of tokens. And research that I did with Gohan, we estimated that tokens in multi-agent systems are 15 times bigger than in a single pass API call to an LLM. So cost of LLMs are going down, but they are still 15 times more expensive and more consuming and so on and so forth. So these are some things that we need to be aware of and try to find, okay, what's the most optimal token usage or workflow, okay? It could also be interesting to, for example, use a very large language model for translation if we see that this has a positive impact, and then have a smaller large language model for terminology enforcement or for any other kind of task. We can play around with that. You can provide or give one LLM to one agent and give another LLM to another agent and so on and so forth. Okay, so personalization is huge. And then finding all these kind of optimal workflows, I think it's one of like the most relevant parts or relevant ways of looking at this, okay? So once problems are shared here, I want to talk about one paper that will be published in January 2026 with myself and Sharon O'Brien, and we are seeing all this kind of increase in use of Gen AI, LLMs, in language technologies, in many different things. So we really need to think of how do we deploy these systems? How do we make sure that these systems are reliable, safe, and trustworthy? So we propose a theoretical framework or a theoretical model by focusing or using the human-centered AI topic or framework by Schneiderman in the US. And the three main topics are reliability, safety, and trustworthiness. So what are like the techniques or what are the steps that we can add there for LLMs or Gen AI or AI in general to be more reliable? Reliable in this case means to make sure that the terminology that we are using is the appropriate one, even if we are using non-deterministic systems. Huge problem, but we are trying to look at that. How do we measure that output or AI output is safe? So what does safety mean in healthcare? What does safety mean in legal translation or in public services and high-stakes communication? And then how we can make sure that end users trust the output of AI systems. Okay, so this is what we are doing. This is being published in 1 month, but I'll certainly share it. And what we are doing also, or what I'm going to explain a bit better, is an example of how we plan to do this, okay, or what we are proposing in the paper. So I'm really interested in healthcare. So as a migrant myself, I live in Ireland. My parents came visit me and they do not speak English. My dad had a kind of a small accident and he was not able to communicate properly and to go to the hospital. So that's a tricky situation if you cannot be there and then the hospital doesn't have an interpreter, okay? So I'm really personally motivated by that. So how can we make sure that we use AI in healthcare, for example, with a human-centered perspective? Very important, okay? It's not just like launching AI and that's it, but how do we make it reliable, safe, and trustworthy? So what we are proposing is a workflow of different agents. For example, a machine translation agent that is fine-tuned only within the medical domain, that has a specific set of glossaries or term bases from a specific emergency department, for example, so that only uses that. And then if the conversation or if the document goes beyond that scope, the system says, oh no, I cannot do that, please hire an interpreter or do this kind of stuff. So we are improving reliability and safety there. In order to improve trustworthiness, we have a quality estimation agent. I don't know if you've seen what is quality estimation right now in machine translation, but it's one of these LLMs or systems analyzing different elements and providing a probabilistic score of the quality of the output. So it may say, oh, look at this fragment looks problematic. So please be aware that there may be a problem here. So it's improving transparency or explainability in AI output. And at the end, we also have a last AI agent that does like some kind of plain language editing, okay? So this document that may be very specialized in the medical domain gets translated or simplified so that a person who's not a native speaker, who doesn't talk that language, can really understand that document, okay? Last thing, this is another example from my company. So we are now starting to work, for example, with a financial company. This financial company writes documents with very complex financial terminology, and they want to simplify all these versions, okay? So they want to simplify this. So how do you think that you would use AI to simplify complex financial documents? And what problems do you foresee when doing that, if any, or everything is easy peasy? Any idea? So very complex financial documents. We want to simplify them with AI because everyone wants to use AI right now. But what can happen if?
Haciendo may not be happy.
Okay, yeah, that could be. One of the problems is that we use AI for simplifying language, which a lot of companies do. It may simplify language, but it may omit crucial terminology. Imagine that you have a crucial piece of information in English, and it's simplified in English, but it's deleted in the simplified version. So that can have like very serious consequences for the company, okay? So how can we look at this, or how can we measure this? So what we are doing is using all these kind of like readability metrics, like small, flash Kincaid index, so on and so forth, do not provide a lot of information or enough information. So what we are first doing is we are having first a plain language editing agent from complex English to easy or plain language English. Then we have a second agent that identifies in the source text which are like the main concepts or the complex concepts or the crucial terms in the source text and make sure that they are all present in a target text. And finally, a third agent that prepares a final version simplified. Okay, so we are mitigating or reducing. I'm not going to say eliminating because I doubt that there's a 100% success here, but we are mitigating or reducing the risks of omissions or crucial omissions in financial documents. Okay. So to conclude, and I'll open this for questions in case that you're interested. Recommendations when deploying or developing AI agents, personalization and customization. This is not a system or this is not a workflow that or a tool like one size fits all. I hope they are okay. This is not a one size fits all thing. So it's not I create one system and a generic empty system like Google Translate or DeepL and I'm going to use this everywhere. This is not the way. I think we are changing towards an area of personalizing technology for very specific use cases. And I really think that that's very useful for translation or interpreting or like linguistics, like kind of like programs, because right now Python literacy or AI literacy and knowing how to build this kind of stuff, it's less complex than ever. So how to design workflows like this and understand what are the problems of companies or organizations and develop them. Limitless workflows, I already shared some kind of images, but I want you to invite you to play around and try to think how would you move like the different boxes and how could a system or a workflow like this be useful in your specific use case. Then there's a lot of work with memories, what are like the best tools, what kind of databases we give agents access to, so on and so forth. This is upcoming work, but very interesting one. And most importantly, I think that we need to do a human-centered perspective to everything, okay? When using AI or all these kind of technologies, I think that we really need to look at reliability, we really need to look at safety, and then trustworthiness of the end user as well. So that's some kind of work that we're doing there, okay? It's something that it's inevitable, I would say. So like working or building or having these from the outset, I think it's the most important thing, okay? And the last joke before the questions, play with temperature. It's also important to play with the temperature and seeing what's the best temperature for each task, but avoid getting burned, okay? So thank you and gracias. And I only accept easy questions, okay?
Bueno, moltes gràcies. Podem començar a fer preguntes. A veure que miraré a veure si tenim preguntes del públic també, mentre els presents ho van pensant. A veure, aquí tenim la gent. Noribel, comenci.
Thank you for the talk, very interesting. What is very interesting and very opportune in the sense that more and more we are having news that the most important part now in using AI is not the AI, but knowing the processes. Because actually what the AI is meant is to automatize the processes, but who knows the process, the expert, the human expert. So I think it's very important. I have a question for clarification. That is, what do you really mean with this? You say that your prompt or your instructions say verify or qualify whether the changes, because your temperature is higher, your changes are needed.
Okay.
What do you mean by what should the machine do and how this is spelled out?
Okay.
I don't see the
yeah, that's a very interesting question and a tricky question as well. So what we were playing around here is that you just think that you can have temperature in one LLM from 0 to 2. The higher, the more creative it is, and the lower, the less creative, the more deterministic it is. Okay. What we saw is that if you put temperature closer to 2, for the same kind of prompt, the same kind of document, and everything, there are like 100 suggestions of changes. If you put temperature closer to 0, there are only like 5 suggestions of changes. Why? Because like the system is more open to change, to create.
And it's just probability.
Yeah.
Lowering the probability.
Definitely. And then the most important thing is knowing, okay, so what's best or what temperature is best for my specific use case? What we saw is that when we have lower temperature, the changes are less, but are also like better in this case, that they are like more stretch the point. When you have like a very high temperature, there are changes that are interesting, but okay, they are actually not needed, you know? So knowing where is the threshold between what's needed, what's not needed, and how the system knows what's needed or what's not needed, that's difficult, or I would say impossible to know with non-deterministic systems. What you need to understand, and I think that's the most important thing, is what's your specific use case, what does your client or your organization or your specific use case need, and how do you try to find the best system configuration for that.
So do you mean that you do it every system? You try and you try to
that's it.
find out what is
that's it. And then you analyze.
I thought that this was a task you were asking the system.
No. So
okay.
I have, I'm gonna use one more. I don't know if I have the. I think that's interesting. I'm gonna. In the paper, there's a demo, which we're gonna. So there's a demo here, and I'm gonna show that like that temperature kind of setting. Okay. So this is just a very basic system. What we're using in production is way more advanced than this, because this is only like just one prompt. But what you can see if the Streamlit goes is that you can just select the temperature yourself like very easily, you know, with just like a grading kind of style. So that's you select that and then you compare the outputs. And then what can be interesting as well is that you can change the temperature, or I think there's even more than temperature. Temperature is one of the most important parameters, but there's more as well. And then you can identify, okay, for this terminology kind of thing, higher temperature is better or tends to be better than lower temperature. Why? Because you just check and do some kind of evals on that. That's the only way of doing it. So this is, if it goes, so this is the demo where you can select, for example, different large language models. You need to introduce your API key because I'm not gonna pay for everybody's live usage. And then you can play, for example, so I'm gonna upload a document on something, the translator agent is gonna have a temperature of 1, the adequacy agent is gonna have a temperature of whatever you want. You choose source and target languages, and then you upload a file that it's a TXT file, a PDF, or a Word document, all this kind of stuff. So that was the demo of the paper on AI agents, to explain a bit on how this works and with a more user-friendly interface.
And have you to check how one system is?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. They are very consistent if you have the same kind of input, the same kind of instructions, and all this kind of stuff.
Like the same kind of input?
So the same documents. So,
for instance, so have you tried whether the results are consistent? If not trying the same documents, but the documents in the same domain, or the same domain through some variety? So
I tested this on legal and healthcare, and yes, they are kind of consistent. It's true that there are some kind of deviations, but I think the important thing here is that the first translation is not going to be consistent at all. What you need to do is then have a second agent that checks terminology, for example. If you have your glossary or you have your database, you have like first translation that's run or conducted by the general LLM, but then you can have a second agent that enforces terminology, for example. I don't know if I'm responding to your question.
Yeah.
No.
Les persones que sou a casa podeu fer preguntes, podeu aixecar la mà o directament podeu dir no podem veure el que està presentant. Però has d'estar aquí. Així. Teniu alguna pregunta més? Nosaltres... Endavant. Gokan.
So, Vicent, thank you for the presentation. It's as usual very interesting. My problem, not problem, but question, an insights question.
Un problema. No ens senten la pregunta des de casa. Et pots acostar... Com hem de fer això?
Aquí a l'esquerra. No. Aquesta és el micro.
Estupendo. Gràcies.
Vale, bueno.
Em tornes a deixar per
Aquí, ¿lo ves?
Tú la dices y yo repito.
No, vale, si estoy aquí, yo creo que se escucha. Okay, like the question is, I will ask it from here, just in case it's the strangest way of asking questions, probably. The question is, in this kind of evaluation scenarios, whether to use a classical LLM without the need of multi-agents or whatever agents. Like I saw recently that in WMT, in this workshop on machine translation, that the thinking model of Gemini 2.5 Pro was already better than human in 6 of the 10 evaluations. So have you tried checking the Vicent Briva? Now you need to all come here and ask it. Okay, so the question is like, have you like also tried comparing to a standard model with reasoning as opposed to using all the multi-agent architecture? Because I guess depending on the use case, the scenario, the normal model with reasoning is already enough. And like, what would be your insights? Like when to decide to just go with one and not the other? Like,
so I'm gonna give you an industry perspective on this, okay?
Yeah.
Not the academic thing. This depends on the moment that you ask, and this changes every day, I would say. So the most important thing to know is to really understand what's your specific use case and do some kind of LLM evals and some kind of internal evaluations of what works best for you. So what we are seeing in WMT 25 is that Gemini 3 or Gemini models are like the state of the art right now in translation. Even Gemini, when you use Gemini, or ChatGPT or all this kind of stuff, you are seeing an interface that is, you are sending something, but then there's some kind of routing and there are agents behind. So what you are doing, or for example, all these kind of ChatGPT from like model 5.1 and 5, what you are sending is you send first one prompt. Depending on the difficulty of the prompt, they send it to a better model or to a worse model, but you don't see that behind. But there's an orchestrator agent that identifies the difficulty of your prompt, sends it to a difficult model or to an easy model, and at the end, there's some kind of agentic reasoning behind that as well. What we are seeing, reasoning language models work best than a normal language model for translation. So I would suggest keep updating your language model or the language model you use with each new update that comes up, and try to look at what's the best model for like your specific use case. Languages play a very important role here. We are only talking about English, Spanish, all these kind of major languages, but what happened with minor languages? Do all these large language models cover all these minor languages? Probably not. And then costs. So there are big companies that have a lot of like budget for using Gemini 3 via the API. There are some others that do not. So it may be also interesting from a production perspective to use just a very big large language model for the best or the most important task, and then try to compare in smaller tasks whether a smaller large language model that's like 10x cheaper offers the same kind of quality and measure trade-off. So my recommendation depends on your use case.
so use case will guide you.
Yeah, I would say so. Personalization and customization is the most important thing, I would say. And iterate fast. Because it's the moment that I say on Monday, oh, yeah, I've seen this new paper or this new thing, I'm gonna save some time on Saturday or Friday to look at this, and then on Friday and Saturday, that's already obsolete. So, interesting moments ahead.
Was your DeepSeek model the R1 model or the
That
DeepSeek?
was, yeah, I did that experiment just the week that DeepSeek was launched. So it was like
The R1 one?
R1, yeah, like the reasoning one.
Okay.
So right now, if you do this right now, the result will be completely different to like 2 months ahead or in 2 months time. So like the most important thing is reasoning language models are better for, or have been demonstrated to be better in translating because they reason, and then just try to, in some cases, and languages, but that depends on the context.
Molt bé. Sabeu que podeu fer les preguntes en català, en castellà, en anglès.
En anglès, sí.
Endavant, sisplau. Ai, no, que tu no et sentiran. Com ho fem?
Tu ho dius i jo la repetisc.
D'acord.
És a dir, el tema de treballar amb informació del sistema de salut o finances, que és informació molt sensible. Aquest tema com ho gestioneu? Perquè el tema de els models, també d'aquest tema que comentes evolucionar molt ràpid, però no sé si hi ha hagut actualitzacions amb el tema.
Molt interessant. És a dir, hi ha certs... Depèn també del client, per exemple. És a dir, un client que ja té una instància d'Azure o de... Ok. Sí. En el tema de sanitat o de high stakes communication, de com s'utilitzen dades sensibles o sensitives, no se dirà en català, sensibles, amb aquests models. I aleshores hi ha certs models. Primer, hi ha una opció que és que molts hospitals o moltes empreses volen el sistema on-premise. És a dir, prefereixen agafar un open source que també tenen molt bona qualitat ja i utilitzar-ho on-premise. O ja tenen certs acords també en empreses grans que se suposa que no utilitzen les dades, però se suposa, i s'acordes entre ells i s'utilitzen. Coses que fem, nosaltres sí que utilitzem coses open source per a fer anàlisis o sistemes locals per a fer tots aquests experiments actuals. Però sí que ja sé que, per exemple, hi ha hospitals que estan utilitzant Seminari i validats i aprovats per el Chief Data Protection Officer de l'hospital en Dublín, etc. Per tant, això ja està passant. I suposo que tindran un acord per no revelar dades. Per tant, és una limitació que és important, però no penso que sigui molt problemàtica en els pròxims anys perquè se va solucionar relativament fàcil.
Ona, endavant.
Sí, hola, bon dia. Em sentiu bé, Hola, Vicent. Encantada d'haver-te escoltat, molt interessant. Escolta, sí, sentiu? Et volia demanar, has explicat, em sembla que has dit que era a la teva empresa que havíeu fet servir per textos financers així complicats agents d'IA per simplificar el llenguatge. Llavors, et volia demanar dues coses. Una, si en general l'experiència us havia anat bé, si us funcionava bé i amb quines llengües, suposo que en anglès, perquè pel que jo sé encara no està molt treballat això amb totes les llengües. Bé, veure què em podies dir. I la segona, com que has comentat que la simplificació la fèieu sobretot en relació amb la terminologia, que era complicada, clar, què fèieu amb aquesta terminologia? Perquè tot això també depèn dels textos que volíeu simplificar, qui s'adreçava. Però, clar, jo sempre parteixo una mica de la idea que la simplificació no ha de voler dir tampoc banalitzar. És a dir, que la terminologia, més que eliminar-la, s'ha de mantenir i el que s'ha de fer és explicar-la. Llavors, bé, a veure si era una mica aquesta l'estratègia.
Sí, molt bona pregunta i gràcies. La resposta és sí. Pots apagar el...
Sí, perdó.
La resposta és sí, està anant bé. Actualment hem fet una prova pilot, però estem molt contents i estem fent-ho anglès-anglès. És a dir, anglès complex, anglès senzill. Cosa bona, que no estem fent un sistema per a solucionar o simplificar tot l'anglès del món. És a dir, és un grup de documents que són prou repetitius, saben quines són les informacions clau que ha d'aparèixer i, per tant, el client ja té un glossari o té una base de dades amb exemples fets per humans o fets com a gold standard. I, per tant, és molt més senzill saber la classe d'acció, la classe de risc o una cosa, un element específic que és molt important, que donar-ho com a instrucció perquè això és una cosa que s'ha de comprovar. Per tant, en un cas d'ús molt personalitzat, molt específic i molt concret, és relativament senzill i factible obtenir un 98% de fiabilitat. És a dir, prou elevada.
Més preguntes que puguem tenir aquí. Aprofitem que tenim el Vicent Briva Iglesias. Encara uns minuts, si fa falta. I si des de casa teniu alguna pregunta, podeu escriure-la o podeu obrir la pantalla com ha fet la Ona. I si no hi ha... endavant, Aina. Farem la repetició de Joan.
Sí.
Gràcies per l'explicació. I volia demanar en l'àmbit del healthcare, quin tipus d'informació esteu enviant? Més diària, de conversacions diàries, de problema pacient, doctor, o una informació més tècnica? O si podries...
Hem fet dues coses. Hem fet primer un estudi... Sí, la pregunta és, perdona, la pregunta és si en l'àmbit de la sanitat, si estem mirant més terminologia molt complexa o en quin àmbit estem fent servir aquesta tecnologia. Hem fet dos pilots. El primer punt és terminologia de càncer. Per tant, també més o menys en un grup d'idiomes més o menys clars hi ha glossaris desenvolupats per saber quina és la terminologia dient i comprovar que s'està dient coses bé i millorar reliability. I després també una altra cosa molt interessant que hem fet un estudi pilot amb l'equip, el front desk d'un hospital en Dublín. És a dir, les persones que arriben, Dublín és una ciutat molt multicultural, suposa que com Barcelona, venen persones amb moltes classes d'accents diferents, amb poc de coneixement de certs idiomes i fins i tot l'accent irlandès, good luck. Jo duc 5 anys vivint a Irlanda i una cosa que penso que faig encara és no entendre'ls. Per tant, això, un sistema de veu, és molt difícil, també, els accents. I aleshores estem fent en això, sobretot coses de noms, el lletreja el nom, o quin problema tens, o explica què te passa, o coses molt més bàsiques. I una cosa molt interessant és que ja estem tenint tecnologia que, per exemple, cancel·la el so de fons, que si fas elimina això perfectament. I, per tant, són casos d'usos diferents, però al final és desenvolupar per al que faci falta, per aquesta personalització que penso que és molt important.
Endavant, Lluís.
Pots contestar en anglès si vols i repetir la pregunta en anglès. Quines eines feu servir? És a dir, com es dissenya la gent? O només podeu recórrer a agents que al web?
No.
I m'imagino que tot això deu ser a la web. És a dir, que tu no vens una cosa física a un client, sinó que l'instal·les en algun lloc i ell accedeix. Si pots explicar una miqueta tot això, perquè alguns dels agents de la tia que coneixem són el Mercadeu i el Firewood.
Sí, la pregunta és que quina tecnologia s'utilitza així i al final és Python. Hi ha moltes llibreries diferents per a fer agents i és directament programar, entendre quin és el cas d'ús específic i fer en una llibreria específica un agent i després també és Python, processament de llenguatge natural i fer crida a eines i coses així. Per tant, el que fem és desenvolupar un sistema específic en certes necessitats específiques per a cada client. Encara que l'objectiu a llarg termini seria fer com una cosa senzilla. Estan començant a aparèixer eines que són més de no-code o low-code per fer aquesta classe de tecnologies. Però estan apareguent i encara són complexes i suposo que arribarem a un moment en què arrastrant una caixeta podràs aconseguir tot això. Però de moment, ahí estem, lluitant.
Moltes gràcies.
L'Amparo Alcina, pregunta, tens la paraula.
Hola, ¿se me oye?
Sí.
Sí, vale. Buenos días. Bueno, enhorabuena por la charla, Vicent. y enhorabuena por el carrerón que llevas desde que saliste de la UJI, no sabía que te estabas dedicando a estas cuestiones. Y entonces quería aprovechar para comentarte, porque muchos que estamos haciendo terminología, yo creo que nos lo planteamos, es también cómo preparáis la terminología para alimentar el LLM. ¿La preparáis de alguna forma desde el punto de vista técnico? Porque nosotros que estamos desarrollándola ya, también nos preguntamos si deberíamos, pues, ponerla en algún formato específico, qué lenguajes estáis utilizando para esa terminología, si interesa ya que esté en formato de ontologías, por ejemplo.
¿Vale?
De ahí me puedes dar una cosa. Y gracias de nuevo.
Depende, hay 1000 maneras de hacer que un agente aprenda terminología. La más sencilla y básica es directamente, si es una terminología muy básica, meterlo en una prompt. Es decir, estamos viendo que hay cada vez una ventana de contexto más grande. Por tanto, hay muchas veces que si son cosas sencillitas, que información en la prompt o de como context engineering es interesante, pero en el nivel de que escala o de que ya no solo terminología, sino que son corpus paralelos o que hay algún tipo de información más contextual, la técnica que más se utiliza es RAG, que es Retrieval Augmented Generation, pero hay 1000 maneras de hacer RAG. Entonces, al final es preparar los datos en cierta manera, mirar diferentes tipos de bases de datos para que un LLM pueda entenderlo y no te puedo contestar de una manera diferente. Por tanto, es decir, hay 1000 maneras. Nosotros lo que estamos haciendo es utilizar RAG, pero tengo seguro que habrán otras 1000 maneras de hacerle este tool access, ¿no? Al final es como un tool access al sistema. Entonces, o más complejas, más técnicas, o más basiquitas para cosas de menor escala y envergadura a través del contexto, la ventana de contexto.
O sea, que no necesariamente en forma de glosarios específicamente.
Nosotros lo que tenemos, por ejemplo, es otro sistema que ya directamente recibimos la información del cliente, que cada cliente es de un padre y de una madre y tiene la información de una manera, por tanto, tenemos nuestra propia manera de coger esa información de la manera en la que está el cliente y cómo digerirlo en la manera en que trabajamos nosotros. Pero habrá 1000 maneras más. Entonces, no hay una cosa que dices, esta es la panacea o esta es la manera. Depende de cómo se monte el sistema. Pero haber respondido tu pregunta. ¿Hacia dónde mirar?
Gracias. Gràcies, Vicent.
Ens en queda una per aquí, no? Doncs llavors, moltes gràcies una altra vegada per aquest multilingüisme tan natural.